Trump ultimately, probably in 2 years' time, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. And that might send all the liberal wokies screaming into their hankies as normal because they overreact to everything he ever does and can't ever see good. But actually, if he was to achieve those two things on his watch, we should all applaud him.
Piers Morgan joins us in the Daily Tea studio. We're going to start this like we start every podcast with a big wig, if we can call you that, Piers, and ask you, how do you take your tea?
Well, A, this is my real hair, if that's what you're getting at. B, I like it. Well, I'm a bit old-fashioned in the sense that I don't know how many bags you put in. I'm a Yorkshire Gold guy. I'm a five-bag pot.
I think it might be Yorkshire, actually. Let's check in the producer. Yeah, I think John is nodding, our producer,
Really?
John. Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, so we've got exactly the type of tea you like, yeah?
Yeah, always put the milk in first, otherwise you can't tell whether the shade and tone of the tea is correct.
You say when?
So just a little bit, a bit more. You can be a bit generous on the milk. Bit more.
Blimey.
Done.
Tea milkshake.
How many bags?
Well, I think it had 2 in it and it's brewed.
Yeah, well, I'm a 5-bag guy.
What?
Yes. I like strong tea. That's pretty good.
It's coming out
Pretty good. A little bit weak though.
I feel you've over-milked it there, Piers, if I can say. Sorry.
Well, no, you've underbagged. It's not over milk. The milk was correct.
It's all on
the
your
bag
point.
is
Kamal,
2
what?
bags. So you get this. You get a Kamal kind of tea.
It all depends on your
What are
point
you
of
saying?
view.
This is
Well,
neither
now-
one thing or t'other.
Yeah. Now, Piers, we also ask, once we've poured your tea, as Camilla has done, we also ask, now, not a member of your family, because that would be unfair, but alive or dead, who would you most like to share a cup of tea with?
Oh, that's a good question. Alive or dead? I would say alive or dead. Winston Churchill.
Yes.
I actually, funny enough, I for some inexplicable reason, I was voted Cigar Smoker of the Year recently. And it was a big event.
Was it because you smoked cigars?
Well, I
Piers?
do
Just a desperate stab in the dark, but was that the reason?
Well, I only smoke about 4 or 5 a year. I don't actually smoke. I never smoke cigarettes. So I have 4 or 5 cigars a year, but I tend to post about them in a very, self-aggrandizing way, as you would expect. And they made me Cigar Smoker of the Year. And I remembered a story that I'd actually bought Winston Churchill's half-smoked cigar. And it was actually a brilliant provenance, this, because it came up at auction. And it was the chaplain of a battleship. And it was when Churchill went to see Roosevelt in the war on the boat. And it was halfway on the journey. And Pearl Harbor happened. It was all very historic when this was all going on. And they had a powwow meeting on the boat. And he smoked half this cigar. And the chaplain was with them. And he kept the half-smoked butt, which I bought. So I have half of Winston's cigar, Partagas, I think it was, a Partagas. I'm more a Monte Cristo guy, but it was a Partagas cigar, and it's one of my prized possessions, yeah.
And tell us, did you smoke a cigar when you decided to go solo? I mean, explain to us what's happened here, because obviously you had a deal with News UK, you were doing Uncensored, it was supported by Rupert Murdoch, who is somebody that you have worked with for a long, long time. He was the first person to appoint you as an editor, the youngest editor in British history. And now you've decided to make the quite bold and brave move to go it alone.
Yeah, I don't actually think it's that brave or bold,
No?
to be honest. No, I don't. I think it's a natural thing for me to do. I mean, the genesis of it was, as you know, I went back to work for Rupert Murdoch and was delighted to do that. We had a great time, working back with each other again. And I've seen a lot of him in the last 3 years. But we went through trying to do Talk TV, which, you're at GB News. It's a tough market. You're doing very well, I've noticed.
Thank you very much.
But it is a tough market. And if you put all the ratings on a normal day or normal sort of news period together of, say, Sky News, GB News, Talk TV at the time, BBC News Channel, you're still not getting many people. You can build brands, as GB News is doing, with digital and linear and everything else. But linear television, to me, feels like it's a ticking clock to the same kind of oblivion that you see with print newspapers. And I base that really on what my kids are from 31 to 13. So 31, 27, 24, 13. The most interesting thing you can do in the media, actually, if you've got children or your siblings have children, whatever, just watch their habits.
Yeah.
Watch what they do. How do they consume news, entertainment, sport, and so on? And I quickly realised, and my sons were very adamant, Dad, no one watches TV of our age group. We do for live sport, but that's about it. We don't watch television. We watch clips of stuff, and we share that, or we watch YouTube. And then at the same time, I saw a survey came out in America. So 10% of all American television watchers who watch TV on their smart TV now do it through the YouTube app.
Yeah.
Comparative to 19%, I think it was, for cable news and 23% for broadcast news. And these graphs are going a diagonal ways, right? Opposites, if you like, where clearly within about 2 years in America, most Americans will watch television on their TV through the YouTube app on their smart TV. So by this time, I come off linear television with Talk TV, and then they actually shut down the linear version a few months later. And so for about a year, I've been digital only, just with the YouTube channel. And we've just seen exponential, ferocious growth. We've got 3.6 million subscribers now. You know how big that is. I mean, I checked GB News on the way in, as I would, being a competitive animal. Your entire network has about 1.6 million subscribers. So for one person, me,
it's amazing
to have 3.6, and we've only had 2 years compared to 3. I'm not having a dig at GB News. I'm a big admirer of what you've achieved there. But it shows you how fast we've grown. And it also shows me that the future is pretty well YouTube, actually, for the next few years. And I think you're going to see it become the number one TV medium, for want of a better phrase, in the world very quickly. And you saw two things happen with the US election. On election night, more people in America watched the election for results and analysis on YouTube through all the big YouTubers than they did on broadcast or cable. And Trump won, not exclusively or predominantly, but one of the reasons he won was that he did relentless appearances on big YouTubers and streamers, including ultimately Joe Rogan in the last week of the campaign, where 70 million people watched that interview on YouTube. Nobody can tell me that it's not connected to the fact that so many young men in particular came out to vote for Trump. So I think you put all these things together, and it may seem bold and brave to people in the media. Actually, to me, it seems a very logical thing. We're not a startup. We've been going on digital since the very start of Talk TV, so for 2.5 years. We've built a very big, powerful base, 3.6 million subscribers, like I said. We're getting millions of views for all our content. I'm right now, after Joe Rogan, arguably the second biggest YouTube channel in the news, opinion, interview space in the world. And I think we can get much, much bigger very quickly. So for all those reasons, it seems to me, I would say, more a logical than a brave move, actually.
Tell us about your editorial approach. Obviously, it's called Uncensored. You're known for your big backing of freedom of speech, that people should be allowed to speak and be challenged on their views, whatever those views may be. Just tell us what you want Uncensored to look and feel like. And is it all about Piers Morgan? Because the thing about Piers Morgan, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Meghan Kelly, they are all single individual brands. Is that what this will be?
Well, interesting you mentioned Ben Shapiro, because he would be the model I would say you should think about in relation to Uncensored. I think Uncensored has really resonated with people because we all feel like we're living in an ever more censorious world. Actually, that worm has been turning quite quickly, particularly since Trump's win, actually, which was kind of, in my opinion, a repudiation of a lot of the woke stuff, as well as everything else. So I look at Ben Shapiro. He was on his own 9 years ago. Then he got a good commercial team with him. They created a thing called the Daily Wire, a big website in America, one of the most popular. It slants conservative in his case. And underneath him at the top of this pyramid, they have Jordan Peterson, they had Candace Owens, they have Matt Walsh, they have about 4 or 5 people, all with their own big YouTube channels. They also all do live shows, big live shows. Jordan Peterson plays to thousands of people, Ben Shapiro the same. They all do books. Some of them make documentary films. They have a children's movie department now at Daily Wire. And the best story about the Daily Wire, which I love retelling, is they had a run-in with an advertiser who did razor blades. And rather than try and woo them back, it's one of these things where advertisers, they just run a mile, the slightest thing. And they ran a mile and they didn't try and get them back. Instead, they launched their own brand razor blades. Now it makes them $20 million a year. So I'm thinking, the Morgan cigar, the Morgan rum, the Morgan beer, the Morgan wine.
Ben Shapiro has a hair gel even.
Can we get Piers' hair? A bit more strong tea, because this is so weak at the moment.
Yeah, no,
can we imagine?
It's making me feel like Alex Beresford at the Good Morning Britain.
Piers, can we imagine? Will I be able to buy Piers Morgan hair gel? And,
I don't think hair gel so much. I don't really use that, but I think To me, what it shows you is that, in answer to your question, Meghan Kelly at the moment is on her own. Tucker Carlson's on his own. And they're doing incredibly well, making a ton of money, making a lot of noise, arguably more than they did when they were working for conventional networks. And they're getting bigger and bigger very quickly. But Ben's at the top of very big business now, where if he got run over by a bus tomorrow, the Daily Wire would keep powering on. They have enough firepower below him. I would like Uncensored in 5 years' time to be exactly the same, where I by then will have had 4 or 5 people, maybe more, maybe less, who I've added to the stable of Uncensored, and that we're all doing big YouTube channels, we're all doing live shows, we're all doing books, and you develop a little mini media empire. That's the idea, and that's what I think is very achievable. And it's all built around opinion. It's about people with big, confident opinions, who can articulate them in a way that can be put on camera and people can enjoy that. In my case, I'm not right or left. I like to see myself more now as a ringmaster to genuine, rigorous debate of all people. And my favourite is where you get 2 very smart people on the left, 2 very smart people on the right, and they duke it out for 90 minutes about whatever's in the news, from LA fires, presidential election, Israel-Hamas war, Ukraine-Russia, whatever it may be. And I'm the ringmaster, and I'm picking holes in both sides, and if it's one-on-one again, and sometimes I do one-on-one, both sides, pick holes, but I don't want to be pigeonholed left or right. I think I've got a niche now where most of the people in this space at the moment are either on the right or they're on the left. Mehdi Hassan would be an example of someone on the left doing very well. I want to be that guy, probably really pretty centrist, journalistic, hopefully, who's just going to hold everyone to the same account. But you want it to be lively. You want it to be compelling. I don't want a circus. I don't want anyone screaming too much. When that happens, I hate it, actually, because no one can understand when they're watching if everyone starts shouting. And sometimes you want a complete change of pace, a very nuanced, intelligent debate with one person for 90 minutes. I've had some really fascinating conversations with philosophers and scientists and so on. I love that too. So there's no rules. I mean, the beauty of being on your own with your own channel is I can interview the hell I like. The only criteria for me is obviously you want people to watch. So you want to choose things which are compelling, or people that are compelling.
Who's the dream interviewee that you haven't interviewed already?
Well, I've interviewed Donald Trump about 40 times for magazines, for newspapers, for television. He launched my Talk TV show. And last time I spoke to him was a couple of weeks ago, and he did say we could do something special at the White House. That would be great. I've actually never done an interview with anyone at the White House. I've met 4 presidents, and I've interviewed 3, but I've never actually done one at the White House. So that would be great. And Elon Musk is another one. I've had very nearly interviewed him twice. Both times he cancelled over various perceived slights.
Right.
You were cancelled. By him.
By him,
yes.
Yeah.
He's a bit thin-skinned.
Well, he's sort of like Trump, thin-skinned and thick-skinned.
Yeah.
In that they react quite, in a thin-skinned way to any perceived slight, but they can also soak up the kind of pressure and heat which destroys most public figures. If you look at the abuse that Trump and Musk get, a lot of it, you might say, is brought on themselves. Maybe they wouldn't even contest that. But their ability to soak up stuff which would finish a conventional politician, for example, is incredibly admirable as a trait. And what you need, actually, in the kind of modern-day jungle, you've got to have a thick skin. And the thin skin is kind of, I get it. Like, if people have a pop at me, you pretend you don't care, but they're on the list.
Did you get influenced in your decision-making about taking Uncensored away from News UK by Trump's second election as president?
Well, just to be clear, News UK will still have a share of the advertising revenue on our YouTube channel for the next 4 years. So we view it more as a partnership where we both agreed that we both contributed enormously to the creation of the YouTube channel. News invested a lot of time, effort, and money in me and my team, and so they're going to be sharing in the rewards for the next 4 years, and they could be pretty big. And I'm also going to continue doing. If I go to America, I'll appear on Fox and stuff. I'll occasionally write for the Sun and New York Post. I've been doing weekly columns. I'm stopping that, but I may do, if I have a big scoop, go and write for them again. So it's all very, keeping in the fold, if you like, without actually being an employee. I just got to the stage where I just wanted to be my own boss. I mean, apart from anything else, I could then have the glorious moment where I end up having to fire myself.
Yeah,
which I know would be the media's dream moment,
that's
right?
only
Piers
inevitable.
Morgan last night dramatically fired himself.
But that may just happen. You never know.
Piers, you've talked about who you would love to have on and who you've interviewed in the past, and as you say, it's called Uncensored, and you want to be the ringmaster. Are there people that you wouldn't have on? It does uncensored mean that, frankly, anybody, as long as, I mean, even people in prison or for whatever reason, it's perfectly legitimate to have them as interviewees. I'm thinking about, let's say there's been big arguments about Tommy Robinson, for example. Would he go on your show?
I think it's a really interesting question. And it's one I think about a lot more than people may think I do. Because, for instance, I wouldn't have someone like Nick Fuentes on. Nick Fuentes has a very big following. So my normal yardstick is if they have a big following, you're better off examining them and holding them to account so that their followers at least get another perspective. But in his case, he's such an unashamed white supremacist and anti-Semite and the rest of it that you're just giving a platform to a guy who is simply, from the start, is going to spew that for as long as you allow him to on your platform. I don't see any point in doing that. Tommy Robinson's a more complex character and a more complex argument because he's clearly at the centre of a massive raging debate, right? And my view of Tommy Robinson, I interviewed him once in Good Morning Britain. He ended up waving the Quran around, being very insulting to Islam and so on. I think that was unnecessary. I think he says a lot of things which are brazenly Islamophobic, even though they even deny that word exists. I think it does for some people. If you have a genuine hatred for a faith, and you know that 1.7 billion it is support that faith, and you're very insulting about it generally, then you're insulting the people that follow it, and it's my view. And you can be respectful whilst making your point. He has no interest in doing that. He's also a serial convicted criminal, who assaulted a policeman. He ran a hooligan gang. He was convictions for that. He was convicted of mortgage fraud. He was convicted of 3 contempts of court, 2 that nearly ended trials involving people in the very rape gangs he claims to be the great exposer of. And he's now in jail, nothing to do with the rape gangs, as we know as journalists, but because he committed a brazen and repeated libel of a young Syrian refugee boy who he tried to make the villain of a bullying case where he wasn't the villain, he was the victim. So there's a lot of unsavoury aspects to Tommy Robinson. However, he's been right about the rape gangs, and he has been right about that for a long time. And actually, a lot of people didn't take him that seriously when he started what he was saying about them. But if you go back and look at what he was saying, you could make a good argument that he was shouting about was louder than most people when, with a few honourable exceptions in the British media, most people weren't giving it the attention that they should have given it and maybe giving it now. Similarly, when Elon Musk amplifies Tommy Robinson, I don't feel comfortable with him doing that. But if he amplifies the debate about whether there should be a new national inquiry into this, I happen to think there should be. I think there are too many unanswered questions, a serial lack of accountability from all the people who were part of the cover-up, from the police to the local councils to the government and so on. And not enough people have been put in prison generally for what happened in that scandal. And the last national inquiry was just too wide-ranging. It sort of took in too many different aspects of abuse, when in fact what you need is a northern rape gang scandal inquiry, very specific to the 50 towns and villages, I think, where this was happening. And I think that should happen. So in answer to your question, Robinson's in jail now, so you can't interview him. But when he comes out, I've actually changed my view of this. I think I would interview him, and I would hold him to account over the stuff I find objectionable about him. But I would also I would concede to him that he was right about this.
Would you worry, Piers, about giving? It's really interesting to hear the detailed way you think about who you interview and how you interview. Would you worry that whatever you do, it would give him a platform for his unsavoury views, of which you say there are many?
Well, this is where the argument's interesting, because like Elon Musk has 200 million followers on his own X platform. By the constant support he's giving Tommy Robinson, he's giving him a platform far beyond anything I could ever conjure up, including retweeting his film he made about the Syrian refugee boy. So you either allow this to just go out and be fueled by the most followed person on earth, Elon Musk, or you have him across a desk like this and you hold Tommy Robinson to proper account for all the things that he represents and has said, whilst also giving him credit, however distasteful it may be to give someone like that credit for anything, but the fact that on the rape gang scandal, he's been proven right, and resoundingly so. So it's complicated. He's a more complicated case than some of the others. I mean, someone said, would you platform Adolf Hitler? Well, you would think not. Would you platform him in 1938? Probably. most journalists did, right? So it's like, what's the moment? What's the purpose? What are you trying to do? Not just, here's my big platform, gorge yourself on your repellent views to your heart's content. I like to think that if they do have repellent views, I'm going to hold them to account for the repellent views. But it's an interesting argument with each of these people.
I think that's where journalism, what you've said, Camilla, it's where journalism shows that it really matters. In some of these occasions, it is holding people to account, and the journalistic skill really matters in what we do.
Tommy Robinson is pretending to be a journalist.
Yeah, exactly.
And he isn't a journalist.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're the journalists who are able to say, we would hope, in the context of freedom of speech, it may be true that you have raised awareness of grooming gangs, but we might want to ask ourselves whether you would have done that if the perpetrators weren't Muslim.
Yeah, I agree.
And we might also not want to be revisionist about the fact that you were once in the BNP and you helped to found the EDL in Luton.
Would you interview him, you two?
I probably would, but I don't know if you would.
I'm really interested in your take, Piers. I think we'd have a discussion very similar to you, and I'm interested in Andrew Tate, Tommy Robinson. Yeah, it's a very interesting point you've just made about he already has the platform. He's already being followed. He has people like Elon Musk who are already amplifying what he says. I think we would have that discussion.
I've interviewed Andrew Tate 3 or 4 times now, and my argument with him is he's not been convicted of any crime yet. Now, my view of him may change if he is, and it turns out all these allegations about him turn out to be true. But at the moment, there's no activity in terms of actually getting him into a courtroom, which makes me quite suspicious of what is going on with him. And with him, I can find myself nodding to 60, 70% of the stuff he says. But what I'm struck by, and I find myself appalled by the misogyny, which he just spews out. But the interesting thing about him is when I walk around, the number of young men, teenage boys, early 20s, who come up to me, I would say 1 in 5 of that category of people that come up to me want to talk about Andrew Tate.
That depresses me as a mother of a son who I discussed Andrew Tate with only this week. And it's interesting in the context of being on YouTube and who's in and who's out. Even if you look on non-journalistic influencers like the Sidemen and Mr. Beast and all the rest of it. I said, what do you think of Andrew Tate? It's like, well, he's just become irrelevant. It's like he had his moment. He then got caught up in the whole
which might well be the case.
Rape case.
It might well be the case.
And I don't think we give enough credit, Camilla and Piers, that young people can make decisions when they see the evidence in front of them. It's just because we interview Andrew Tate doesn't mean that everyone who watches it goes, oh, Andrew Tate's a good man.
No. And
it's very similar for my son. My son would say, obviously he's aware of Andrew Tate, he's aware of his arguments. That doesn't mean he agrees with him.
No, I get asked, the question I get asked is, what do you really think of him? It's almost like, is there more that we need to know? But you're right, they make their own minds up. What I think young men in particular have felt pretty disenfranchised by society for quite a few years and pretty uncomfortable about what their place should now be and how they should behave as men. What people like Tate do is they fill the void there by giving them a lot of empowerment chat where they tell them to, the things I agree with, keep fit, work out, be mentally strong, be resilient, all these things that Tate pumps out all the time. Yeah, I can agree with that. I actually think we do need to take a lot of that actually on board with how young people generally get helped through what has become a very anxious world for them. There's a brilliant book by Jonathan Haidt, which is back at #1 in New York, about the power of smartphones from 2010. And if anyone hasn't read it, you should read it because it's a pretty scary journey charted right to the point that phones became smartphones and the effect it's had on young, impressionable minds. And, I do think the constant overload of dopamine in particular that young people are getting. You think about when I was young, what was the first big war that I was aware of would be the Falklands War when I was about 16, 17. Well, you only knew what was happening by either the BBC News, the main network news, ITV News, or the newspapers. And all of that was reasonably sanitized. You weren't being shown the full gory details of what was happening on the battlefield. If you think now, I have nearly 9 million followers on Twitter. So imagine the stuff that I'm looking at all day long that people send me.
Do you look at it yourself, or do you?
Well, you can't avoid it.
But do you contract it out?
No,
to
I
staff?
handle it all myself. So, and I'm a pretty strong-minded character, right? I would say I'm mentally pretty strong. So, and as a former newspaper editor, I'm used to seeing a lot of bad stuff. But it is relentless. And the stuff from the battlefields in Gaza, in Ukraine, is utterly horrific. Now, young people are getting that. They're sharing that in a way we were simply not able to do. when we were their age. That has to have a very damaging effect. And that's before you get into the fear of missing out stuff, the Instagram, the fakery, the aspiring to be something that doesn't actually exist, it isn't real. It's a real problem for young minds. I've come around to the conclusion that Australia banning all under 16s from social media, for example, is a good idea. I think all phones should be banned for under 16s in school, right? I mean, I think we've got to take this more seriously than we are.
Can we ask you a bit of a personal question? Because you've done this thing of you've got older grown-up sons and then you've got this young daughter who's 13, similar age. I've got a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. So we're grappling with this at the moment, resisting giving the 11-year-old a phone on the advice of the 16 and the 14-year-old older siblings who say put it off for as long as possible. So the kids are cottoning on to the effect. You mentioned Haight's book there. I think it's called Anxious Generation. What are you doing differently when it comes to parenting your daughter that you didn't?
Well, my
with your
wife,
sons?
who works for Telegraph, Celia, obviously.
We love Celia.
Yeah, and she loves you. Elise, our daughter, has a phone, but she has no access to social media.
Right.
And the reason she has the phone is that so that she can communicate with us. And we both have access to her number, which allows us to see her movements in real time wherever she is. I think that's sensible. So she's always contactable, and we can always tell just by the click of a button on our phones where she is. And I think if you've got a young teenage girl, that's a very sensible thing to do. But she doesn't have any access to social media, and she won't. Not for
Does she think it's sensible? Does she?
Yeah, she does.
Push back against it?
No,
'Cause
she
I
does.
think now a lot of young people, Camilla, particularly young girls, want to be taken off it.
Yeah.
They want to be more distant.
She's showing
and more in real life.
Yeah, no desire to want to have more at all, even though some of her friends have complete unfettered access to social media. I think it's very damaging for the reasons I say. I mean, I remember Dr. Phil in America, who's a great character, one of the big TV stars there. He's a great kind of empathetic talker, is how I describe his show. I did his podcast, and he was talking about this very thing. He's, when he was young, if you were in rural Florida on a golf course and you saw someone being attacked by an alligator, which happens in Florida, the chances are nobody outside of that immediate area would ever hear about it. The golf course people would talk about it. The local community might talk about it. Poor old Fred got eaten by an alligator. That would be it. Now the chances are that somebody would capture that moment on a phone, on a camera phone. They would put it up somewhere, and before you know it, there are kids all over the world, from Mumbai to Sydney to New York to London, and they're all watching the video of this poor guy getting eaten by an alligator. And they're getting that kind of thing 24/7. No one can tell me that a young, unfully formed mind is not going to be damaged by that relentless dopamine effect, normally negative. They are. And we have to wake up to that as a society.
Piers, I'm interested to know who, if any, you think are the good politicians in this country.
Look at someone like Elon Musk, right, who I've met once for a couple of hours in the summer. He's not actually a politician, but he's having far more power and influence than any politician in the world right now. And you would look at everything he does in totality, and I defy anyone to say this guy is a force of negative stuff for the world. You may not like him opening up Twitter, now X, in the way that he's done, but he's certainly made it a more free and open platform for a lot of conservative thinkers who were getting deplatformed and banned. But my point is this. If you look at Neuralink, you look at SpaceX, you look at what he's been trying to do with free speech on X, you look at Tesla, you can frame an argument that all these things are basically to help the planet. They're also to enrich himself, but they're also to help us save ourselves. I sat with him listening to him talking about colonizing Mars. One of the most riveting few minutes of my life as he detailed why we have to do this and how we have to do it.
But to bring it back to Earth,
my point is,
to bring it back to Earth,
yeah, but my point
who's
is,
cutting through
that's
British
my point.
politics?
That's my point. He's having more cut through in British politics than any
But
politician
who do
here.
you rate in British politics
Well,
today?
it's more like who do I think is effective?
Who?
If I was to put money on who I think might be Prime Minister next election round, I'd say Farage has got a very good chance.
Really?
Yeah, and he's someone I've had a lot of ding-dongs and run-ins with.
What's your analysis of him?
I think he's a smart politician. I think he is. I like the way, for example, he stood up to Musk over Tommy Robinson. I don't agree with everything Farage says by any means, but nor do I think he's this wild, crazy, far-right headbanger that he's often portrayed as. I think he's a smart, canny politician. I think he resonates with people far more than the Conservatives should feel comfortable about. The latest polls show that they're neck and neck pretty much with the Tories now and chasing down Labour. Labour is obviously off to a catastrophically bad start. And I could see a situation if the Tories and Reform get their act together, and they're going to have to merge at some stage, I would think it's inevitable, then who is the most likely leader of that? Probably Nigel Farage. And therefore, I suspect whoever comes through that race will end up probably being the next Prime Minister, the way things are looking. Now, things can change quickly in politics, but I'm more concerned about the paucity of talent right through British politics. It's not good enough. We don't attract the best and brightest people anymore. We don't pay them enough. There's a lot of heat on them from the media, which they often deserve, but that puts off a lot of people in smart business and so on from wanting to take the risk. There's got to be a better way that we attract the finest brains and talent into British politics, because you need the best brains. My point about Elon Musk is he's got a phenomenal brain. I could see that when I spent an hour doing a little Q&A thing with about 15 people and then had an hour just with me, him, and a couple of others. It's one of the most brilliant minds I've ever been anywhere near in my life. You need that kind of brain to get a grip of these big picture issues. Take the NHS, right? Look what he's doing in America with federal spending, right? With this Doge thing that he's doing with Vivek Ramaswamy. I suspect they'll be pretty successful in slashing federal spending waste. Imagine what Elon Musk could do with the NHS. What answers he would come up with for the structural problem we all know we have. A system that was created in the 50s for a population of 50 million that is now creaking at the seams as the population heads towards 70 million. A system where everyone knows that A&E wards are like a war zone most nights. I had experience of it. My mother had a heart attack a year ago. She's fine now, thankfully, but it was a terrifying 24 hours to be exposed to A&Es in this country. She was left on a trolley in a corridor along with 30 other people on trolleys. This was a Monday night in a big south of England hospital and could have died there. People wrote to me, said their relatives had died in that very corridor in the few months before. Once she got up to get the treatment, it was world class. So right there was my exposure to the NHS problems. Try and get a doctor's appointment now. It's a nightmare for most people. So could Elon Musk and that kind of brain cut through all this and work out what the new model for the NHS could be? I would put every penny I have on him being able to do it. Who is that brain in this country that's going to do that? Who is in British politics who is going to actually genuinely get to grips with the NHS and make it a powerhouse for the modern generation? I don't see that person.
Kemi Badenoch says she's an engineer. She said that she will look at these things in an aggressive way. Do you think Kemi Badenoch is that type of person?
Not really. No, nothing against her. I don't know her, but I look at her and think she's okay. I don't think she'd inspire me to open a crisp packet, to be honest, but none of them would. Do I think any of them have the big picture answer? I mean, I was on Question Time with Wes Streeting. I like Wes Streeting. He's a good guy. I like the way he's honest. He talks. He takes everything and he says what he thinks. I like that. But, when he talks about the big reform in NHS, I'm like, well, let's have a little bet. Let's see how you are. They never take the bet because they know that it's just words, because they can't work out how they fund all this or how it's going to work or what it all looks like. You need a big brain. And we've got big brains in this country, but they're not in politics. I don't want to be in politics.
Does Trump have a big brain?
Trump has an amazing gut instinct. He also has an utter fearlessness. He has a total disregard for convention and establishment. And he's just carried out the biggest comeback in the history of global politics. And I suspect will be a far more effective president second time round, mainly because the opposition has just crumbled. So he's not being screamed at 24/7 like he was before, which plays to Trump's worst instincts, where if you punch him metaphorically, he wants to punch you 10 times harder back. That's the pugilist in him. I think he's going to be a much more effective and probably, therefore, successful president this time than he was last time.
What's he like one-to-one?
Hilarious.
What do people most misunderstand about him?
That he's so funny. And he's warm and he's charming and he does things which just, like he rang me 2 weeks ago, an example. I've had about 5 or 6 chats with him since he got shot. And I've known him a long time. I know Donald Trump very, very well. And we've had good times, bad times. We've fallen out, we've fallen back in. Nothing ever lasts forever with him in terms of fallings out. And he rang me the other day, and he just literally has had the conversation when he went, Piers, it's Donald. How are you? He said, I'm just watching on TV in America, something they're doing. He said, with Melania, watching. And I just said to Melania, wow, he's looking great. He's looking great, isn't he? I'm going to call him and tell him how great he looks. So I'm just calling you to tell you you're looking great. I said, Mr. President-elect, thank you. I said, and may I say, you're also, I saw you on television the other day, you're looking great yourself. And then we both burst out laughing. And then within 5 minutes, he's telling me all about his thoughts for the Middle East and about Ukraine and everything. Absolutely fascinating sort of big picture view. My prediction, for what it's worth, is that within 2 years, he'll have sorted out the Middle East issue, because he absolutely believes that the way forward is for Israel to continue normalizing relations with countries like Saudi Arabia, and he'll want that to happen. So he needs peace for that to happen. He's a businessman, a pragmatist at his heart. And secondly, he'll make the Ukraine-Russia war end somehow, which doesn't allow Putin an obvious victory, but allows Ukraine more security going forward. I suspect is how that deal gets done. And in the end, it'll be a deal. And that Trump ultimately, probably in 2 years' time, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. And that might send all the liberal wokies screaming into their hankies as normal because they overreact to everything he ever does and can't ever see good. But actually, if he was to achieve those two things on his watch, we should all applaud it.
Can I just ask you about one of those? And this is where Nigel Farage has had some controversy here, the attitude to Putin. And if Vladimir Putin is able to get any sort of peace deal in Ukraine where he gains land after an illegal invasion, shouldn't that worry Donald Trump? The argument that's been put...
He will gain some land.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't
shouldn't that worry Donald Trump that on his watch, Putin will be seen as a victor? Whatever land he gets, he can argue about well, it's not this and not that. But if he gets any of Crimea and any of the other land that he then invaded after that, that is a victory for Putin.
Look, I agree with you. I have been, since I went to interview Zelensky and his wife in Kyiv in 4 months after the war started, and I saw firsthand the devastation that was going on and the utter determination of the people of Ukraine not to give Putin an inch. I was always right. We've got to fight this right to the end. The problem is, it literally will be, as things are heading, to the end. Ukraine cannot continue this war much longer. They're losing too many people. I think people have no idea of the scale of death that's going on in this war on both sides. And it's reached a horrible stalemate where neither side is really gaining much ground. They're just killing each other in ever more crazy numbers. And you're talking about, 100,000 people in 6 weeks being killed. I mean, these are horrendous numbers. So how do you end it? Ukraine can't win. I mean, my brother was a British Army colonel for a long period of time. He's retired now, but he's always said to me from the start, there's no way Russia loses this war. You understand that? When he saw me appearing saying, of course Ukraine can win. Ukraine particularly can't win given public sentiment in America, which has moved steadily but surely away from trying to give them everything they want to repel the Russians to actually America first is what most Americans believe because of the cost of living crisis, same sentiment you have here. So where do you go? How do you resolve it? How do you end it? And the answer is it's a mess, whatever you do. And the only smart way you end this now, and Zelensky has come out and basically said that he's ready for a deal, is you have to give Russia some of the land they've taken. It will stick in my gullet. I think it's horrific that he can invade a sovereign democratic European country and take land in this murderous way, illegal way, and get away with keeping some of it. But I don't see any way that is not the conclusion here. What you need is to have either that as part of that deal, and it's unlikely that Ukraine comes into NATO, or that NATO gives Ukraine security guarantees, which mean Russia can't come back and try and take more. I think if you get to a place like that, it's what I would call a messy divorce, but it would bring an end to the senseless killing that's going on. And that's probably that's what most military people will tell you is pretty much the only way that this gets resolved. So if you're Trump, you know that. All your top military people are telling you this. You know Ukraine can't win this war. That's the horrible, bitter reality of where we've got to. You can pretend they can, and you can, certainly in the short term, you could keep giving them everything they need to keep repelling the Russians, but are they going to kick Russia out of Ukraine? No.
Can I ask you, Piers, and this is in contrast to your opinions of Donald Trump. Our Prime Minister Keir Starmer? Has he been a disappointment to you? Did you imagine you were going to get something different? It has been 6.5 months of grind and, frankly, much more miserable than even Keir Starmer's most strong supporters would have imagined. What's your take on him and how he should responding to Trump, but also running this country?
I think that I did him for my life story show at ITV, so I had 2.5 hours with him about his life. It's an amazing life, an amazing story. I mean, from where Keir Starmer came up from to get to be Director of Public Prosecutions and then Prime Minister is an amazing personal achievement. So I absolutely salute him for that. I think he's a thoroughly decent person on a personal level, but that often isn't enough. You know, Trump. People might argue, well, Trump's not a thoroughly decent person. Well, maybe not. Although I personally found him to be very decent to me in many different ways. But I can see why other people think he hasn't been. But it doesn't actually matter. What matters is, can they get stuff done? Can they deliver on their promises? You know, when I was, again, on Question Time recently, and West Street, he was talking about the number of homes they're going to build. 1.5 million homes. Really? Really? So I'll tell you what, I'll bet you one of my bets. I'll bet you £1 for every over-under of 1.5 million homes you build in your term of this term of government. And he wouldn't take the bet. And the crowd all got on his, they all just got on his case. But of course he won't take the bet. Of course they're not going to build 1.5 million homes. So I'm pretty sick, like most people, of pledges being made that never get met. We had, I think the Tories had a bunch of pledges. Then Labour had 6 pledges. They've got 5 pledges. There's about 15 pledges out there, none of which have actually been met, apart from the ones which are easy to meet. So my argument for Keir Starmer, nice guy, decent man, one with a big majority, no question, although, as you pointed out, it was slightly smoke and mirrors what that majority really looked like. But if your first move, after so long in opposition, so long to think about it, is to hammer Britain's pensioners, to me it was like, what are they doing? What are they doing? I remember in '97 when Blair won, he and Gordon Brown hit the ground so hard running with so many really exciting things which made people feel better. Now, they had a much better economy that they inherited, but they made people feel good. There was a real feel-good atmosphere in this country. And even if they hadn't voted for Blair, we're like, wow, this looks good, actually. We feel good about it. Britain looked like it was pretty cool. Cool Britannia. Now, it all fizzled out with Iraq and so on, as these things often do. But you look at Keir Starmer, where is that feel that he actually has a big picture? So I would say it to his face, a big picture vision for the country that's going to make us all feel better. It's almost like he was in a competition with himself in that first 6 months to talk everything down so much in an effort to make it look like things are so bad because of the Tories, to then allow him to be the great saviour going forward. But he's over-egged the negative souffle. So now we all genuinely do feel extremely unhappy, extremely miserable, and that has a permeating effect on the economy, as we're now seeing, on how people feel, on their well-being, mental health, all these things. And I just want to say to Keir Starmer, can you do stuff that makes us feel better? Please, do something. Stop making big, vacuous pledges which aren't going to be met. Stop telling us there'll be millions of new homes when there won't be. Why don't you just come out and do something where we all go, love that. Love that idea.
There aren't big, vacuous promises almost now emblematic of the progressive left. I mean, let's move over to America.
Well, no, because the progressive right were exactly the same.
Well,
come on. Tories were useless.
Tories were useless.
We can all agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've written it many times.
So I don't think over pledging, under delivering is a progressive left problem.
Okay, so
they have their own problems, but actually the Tories have been an absolute template in how not to do that as well.
So progressive right and progressive left, both not good enough, promise a lot, deliver a little. We'll move over to America because I cannot let you leave this studio without discussing our mutual friend, Meghan. But before we do that...
Do we have to?
Yes, we do, because you and I sort of had to bond over this because you were saying, I don't know if she's telling the truth, and I was saying, I don't know if she's telling the truth. And then everybody rounded on us and called us white supremacist racists, which was a curious response, but they had it. So we'll get on to Harry and Meghan in just a minute. But just look at the LA wildfire situation and the inadequacy, comparatively, we've talked about inadequacy in British politics, of Karen Bass, the LA mayor, who can't answer any questions, and Gavin Newsom, who in response to the tragedy seems to be sort of turning into Kevin Bacon from Flashdance. What's going on there? Did you have a house that's been...
I have got a house there in Beverly Hills, and I'm looking. I mean, today, actually, as we speak, is a very hairy day for everybody who's got a place in the middle, because the winds are predicted to get back to 70 miles an hour. I mean, to put it in context of what's happened there, when you have I've had a house there for 15 years. There are lots of fires in LA, right? You get them all the time. And they've been having these weird patterns with wet winters and then dry weather and so on. The wet winters for the previous 2 years have meant there's much more foliage out there, more stuff growing. So just to picture, there's a lot more shrubbery, bushes, so on. And then this year, from sort of late summer through from October, they've had about an inch of rain. So this enormously refreshed shrubbery has now got like a tinderbox, literally like a tinderbox, all over Los Angeles. They've had no rain at all. So you then have this thing called the Santa Ana winds, which are like the Mistral in France. Right? They come a few times a year. They're pretty ferocious. You hear them howling all night. You wake up, your garden's covered in crap. And normally it's not that bad because the two don't normally meet, fire and Santa Ana wind. This time, a massive Santa Ana wind with a hurricane force of 100 miles an hour came through at exactly the moment a big fire broke out in Pacific Palisades. And this was the perfect storm that people had warned about. Joe Rogan had a very interesting thing last summer where he alluded to a previous conversation with an LA firefighter saying, if we ever get a Santa Ana wind, a big one, with a fire, and the wind goes the wrong way, we're in big trouble. It could go right through LA. That's exactly what happened. So my business manager, of long-time business manager, he lost his home in Pacific Palisades. 5,000 people in Pacific Palisades alone have lost their homes. And in relation to the government of all this, Karen Bass is useless. I mean, she knew these winds were coming. She knew the potential with all the dryness for a fire was potentially there as well. So there could be a very dangerous situation. And she got on a plane to Ghana to attend the inauguration of the new president of Ghana, having said, as the New York Times revealed, in 2022, I will not leave the country. If I'm voted mayor, I will only travel in America while I'm mayor. First chance she gets, she's on a jolly to Ghana. Why does the LA mayor have to be in Ghana for the inauguration of a president?
And
Ludicrous.
cut the fire budget. Newsom cut his fire budget.
Yes, and Newsom he's Slick Willie. He's the kind of Justin Trudeau of America. He looks the part. He has the hair gel. He's all slick. It's all fast talking. But he's a really progressive, pretty far left guy in terms of policy and how he thinks. And I just find his constant kind of arrogance, his smirking, his smuggery in the last few days as a Beverly Hills resident, I find it particularly offensive, actually, that he just doesn't seem to get the fury that people feel that a major reservoir was closed at the time for maintenance, that not enough preparation had been done for what people had been predicting. Go and listen to the Joe Rogan thing.
But
People knew this could happen.
You must have been absolutely comforted to see Harry and Meghan at the disaster scene, handing out hugs.
Were any of us surprised?
Handing out wisdom. What did you make of that? Because Justine Bateman, famously an actress on Family Ties with Michael J. Fox, sister of Jason Bateman, has described them as, quotes, disaster tourists.
Well, it's funny. I mean, Meghan Markle's father lives, 50 miles away? He had a heart attack. He's had a lot of serious health issues. You know, he doesn't think he has long left. She hasn't been able to spare him a minute of her consoling, comforting time. Harry has never met his father-in-law to this day. He's not allowed Thomas Markle to meet his grandkids. And yet the first sign of any disaster, mass shooting, any opportunity where they can go and pretend to be comforters in chief when they're not even asked for or required or needed, there they are. They're straight there. And I'm afraid I'm very cynical. I think it's purely for PR. It's purely for self-promotional reasons. They just want to be seen to be a rival royal family who are doing what the royals do, but they're not royals anymore. They don't do anything to earn the title. They have decamped to America. They spent their entire time trashing their family, trashing the monarchy. Somehow they've managed to keep their titles, which I think is ridiculous given the damage they've caused to the institution that bestowed them upon them. And now they're down with nothing working for them other than trashing their family. Nothing they've tried since which doesn't involve trashing their family has worked. So now they're running around trying to pretend and behave like a rival royal family. And I find it pretty sickening, actually. And I just think that the answer is that King Charles, who doesn't talk to his son now, but I think he should remove their titles. Simple as that. You can go and do what you like as C-list celebrities. It's pretty much how they're viewed in America now. No one thinks they're A-list. If you want to go and do this for personal self-aggrandizing reasons, fine. But you're not doing it as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex anymore. You're not doing it as part of a family you've tried to bury or an institution you've tried to end. And I think if that's the case, fine, get on with it. The offensiveness to British people, and you see all the polls how disliked they are, is that we see that horrible double standard. And it really grates with us. But in America, most people, honestly, they're just bored with them. They just shrug and say, we're just done with those two.
Harry's going to be back in the UK probably next week. He's carrying on with his case against the Sun for what allegations of unlawful information gathering. I'm sure you don't want to give him any advice yourself, but the fact that this case is going on, the fact that he believes that he has been appallingly mistreated by the UK media, you included. Obviously, you've been through the legal process with him as well. That's just going to keep him in the public eye here. Do you think he should just abandon all that, or is he right to keep fighting what he thinks is a media ethics debate?
I think it's laughable hypocrisy. The biggest invader of royal privacy of modern times was Prince Harry with his book, where he revealed intimate secrets about all of his family, horrible secrets about his family, stuff that should never have been put out there, stuff that if a tabloid newspaper had run it, he'd have been the first to scream about invasion of privacy, revealing conversations with his brother and his father at his grandfather's funeral. I mean, it's hard to see how much lower he could stoop while simultaneously putting himself up there as the great standard bearer for the opposite.
But that's not unlawful. That's the difference, isn't it? One is his allegation is that there has been behaviour that is unlawful. You may say he's invading his own privacy and the privacy of the royal family, but that's not against the law.
I'm talking about his hypocrisy. But it's interesting when he went through this with the Mirror, for example. I was leading the news for 2 or 3 days, and obviously centred on me, and they tried to make it all about me. And in the end, they found one story in the whole time, which the judge concluded may or may not have come from illegal gathering, right, in my tenure. Okay. They couldn't establish it other way. Not a single member of the public mentioned this to me, even though it was leading the news. They don't care because they see through the double standard. They see through the hypocrisy. There are many people who would have a much, in my view, much better case to say my life was trashed by the media, whoever it may be, because they don't play the double standard. But when you're going to be running around doing books, podcasts, Netflix series, and everything else, revealing every spit and cough of your family against their wishes, causing them enormous hurt, as Philip was dying, as the Queen was dying, hard to imagine. It's why none of the royal family talked to him. When you're trying to do that while simultaneously making yourself the great anti-media standard bearer because of our lack of standards, our lack of morals, our lack of ethics. Sorry, mate, that doesn't fly.
Final cue. I want to get back to Celia. Now, Celia I would describe as one of the most sophisticated, beautiful women.
Is there a
working in the media today?
Here?
Well, I was only going to say, would you admit that you are slightly punching? I know that Donald Trump thinks you're looking great, but I'm always intrigued because she does her column about your quite jet-set lifestyle, and sometimes I do look at your social media, and there you are at the Beverly Hills Hotel. What kind of life do you actually lead together? First question, who actually wears the trousers in this marriage, Mr. Morgan?
You know, I just don't talk about things like that. I find it nauseating when other people do it. Well, as an editor, I used to love it. But, you know, I just think that some things are better left unsaid.
Well, you opened your house up to hello once.
No, I would. Well, I
regretted that. Was that a good idea, Piers? I think we saw the inside of your fridge and such.
I don't think anyone needs to see the inside of my fridge. I did it as a favour to my brilliant nutritionist, but I did slightly cringe because I don't like that kind of thing. I would admit that I'm punching way above my weight, and it's not inconsiderable, so that's quite a big punch. But as to the rest of it, I like to maintain an air of mystique.
Mystique. Piers Morgan and mystique. Do we think that is a
good easy bedfellow?
There's got to be some secrets, Piers, hasn't there, in life?
Well, no, I do actually think we've lost. It's a bit like with movie stars. Jack Nicholson hasn't given an interview about his life to television in nearly 50 years. He believes it chips away at the moviegoer's joy of just seeing him on a screen and being able to go into that character. I do think and I love social media, don't get me wrong, I'm the first one out there, but I do think if you don't keep some things slightly mystical, in the sense of if you don't just I've watched some people I know, and they put stuff on social media and you're just like, oh my God, what are you doing? And I think we've all lost that ability collectively as a society to be slightly more demure, and I'm sure Celia would agree with this, I know she does, and to hold certain things back. Because if you just regurgitate everything out there, there's no mystique about anything. The magic slightly dies. Nobody needs to know how the sausage gets made, as we say in the trade.
Overshare the opinions, but not the personal details.
Absolutely.
I can't believe, by the way, we've got through a whole interview with Piers Morgan without mentioning once his beloved Arsenal.
Well,
big
North
game
London,
tonight.
North London derby tonight.
Big game
You'll be
tonight.
there, Piers.
I will.
Right? Are you going to win the league this year?
If we sign a striker, we might. We're only 7 points off Liverpool now. If we sign a striker, we will. We do not have the striker we need to win the league. But there's still, how many days? There's about half of the window left in January. If Mikel Arteta goes out and spends big money on a proper world-class striker, come back to me.
There we are. So you'll be alongside Jeremy Corbyn and
Keir Starmer. Did you
and
sit
all
with
those
Keir
other-
Starmer in the special box area for very,
No, but I
very,
have been
very
at Arsenal-
important people?
I have been at Arsenal games with Keir Starmer. He's a proper gooner, and I do defend him over that whole issue, because the truth is you can't have the Prime Minister sitting in the stands, right? It's bad enough for me when I'm in the stands.
Rishi Sunak used to be in the stands when he,
He did it
went
at
to watch his
Southampton.
beloved
But
Southampton.
he didn't go very often. I think the difference is Keir likes to go whenever he can.
Yeah.
He's a proper gooner. I like that. And I think what happened, from what I understand, the club said, look, we'll let you use one of the boxes. And he went there with his son, I think. I mean, I don't think we should. Another reason why people don't want to go into public life, we make too much of things like that. It's a bit like the argument about whether they should fly in a nice plane or use it's like, if you're going to have a royal family and a prime minister and all these things, give them the trappings which live up to how people would like these things to look on the global stage. The Americans never penny pinch. Air Force One is unbelievable. The White House is always utterly immaculate. You can go into Downing Street. I won't say which regime you were going down, but you go in sometimes, it's pretty tatty. It's like, come on, guys, make us proud. We've got the world coming to these places. So I don't get exercised about a Prime Minister who wants to go and watch his football club. And of course they can't sit amongst regular punters because they'll get a load of abuse. And I think that we should allow people who are leading the country, either in a figurehead way like the royal family. If you're going to have them, let them be properly regal. If you're going to have politicians who are actually any good, pay them more, treat them well, let them have good trappings, and then judge them on delivery. But we want to attract better people with better brains. And at the moment, my fear is a lot of smart people read the Telegraph, right? You have a lot of very intelligent, smart, successful, rich readers. How many want to come into politics now? Compared to, say, 30, 40 years ago? Zero. So you end up with a load of mediocre people making decisions which then impact all of us. I want to see smarter, better people. We've got to talk about change the system. I would, in Singapore, famously, they pay their politicians $1 million a year. I'm not suggesting that, but I certainly think the money we pay our politicians, if you pay peanuts, you're going to get monkeys.
Were you ever tempted to run for office?
I thought about it for half a microsecond. And then I realised I'd end up doing interviews with you two, which wouldn't be quite so friendly.
No, indeed.
It's never really appealed to me. I'm just a journalist at heart. Whatever I've ever done in my life, it's always basically come through the prism of being a journalist. Even when I was judging piano-playing pigs on America's Got Talent, I did it with my journalist hat on.
Would you take a peerage or a knighthood?
No.
You think it's right for journalists to turn on? Have you ever been offered one?
I can't comment.
I'd say that's a yes, just with my journalistic
Of course
hat
it is.
on.
I wouldn't, because I think, actually, I agree with Andrew Neil about that. I think I don't know, it just doesn't sit easily with me that journalists take gongs. As a journalist, you should be slightly reviled by everybody, particularly in establishment. Your job is not to win a popularity contest, thank God. Otherwise, I'd be very upset.
I think on that front, we would all be a bit screwed, to be honest.
The slightly reviled Piers Morgan, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea. What a great interview. And best of luck with your new business and media venture.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.